remember with Canada, we don't need their cars, we don't need their lumber, we don't need their energy, we don't need anything from Canada.
He wants to break us so America can own us. We will not let that happen.
Trade tensions between the US and Canada spiral into full-blown economic warfare. How did we get here, and where is it heading? What started as a diplomatic disagreement has erupted into a historic trade crisis between two of the world's closest allies. The Canada-US trade relationship, often considered a model of international cooperation, is now in turmoil. President Donald Trump's aggressive tariff strategies have triggered a wave of economic retaliation, plunging both nations into a volatile economic standoff that shows no sign of easing. The first strike, US tariffs, ignite the fire. The tipping point came when President Trump imposed a 25% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum imports, citing national security concerns and a need to protect American workers. While the White House framed it as a defensive economic maneuver, Canadians viewed it as an unwarranted attack on a trusted trading partner. The backlash was immediate. Ontario Premier Doug Ford, leading one of Canada's industrial powerhouses, retaliated with a sharp countermeasure: a 25% electricity surcharge on exports to Minnesota, Michigan, and New York, US states highly dependent on Canadian energy. This move was more than symbolic. It hit the power grid and pocketbooks. Experts estimated the average household electricity bill in these states would rise by as much as $100 per month, draining nearly $400,000 per day from local economies. Border communities on the frontline Canadian border towns began to feel the pinch almost immediately. Mayors from cities like Sarnia, Fort Erie, and Niagara Falls warned of a significant downturn in economic activity. "We're on the front line," said Sarnia Mayor Mike Bradley. "There are many joys to being a border city, but when issues beyond our control emerge, we feel the pain first." US tourism into Canada dropped as a wave of nationalism took hold. Calls to shop local and avoid American goods spread rapidly, further dampening cross-border foot traffic. Wayne Redekop, mayor of Fort Erie, explained, "Anything that impedes the flow of people affects restaurants, hospitality, tourism, entire industries built on proximity." In the east, St. Stephen, New Brunswick Mayor Alan McEachern spoke of a growing unease. "There's no hostility, but there's fear. Citizens are confused, even worried about what a US plate on their vehicle might mean in this climate." At the same time, several US governors voiced concern over the federal approach. Michigan's governor warned that these tariffs are punishing working-class families. It's time for Washington to stop the political games and focus on protecting jobs. Markets react. Wall Street tumbles. Beyond the border, Wall Street reflected the rising anxiety of global investors. The possibility of a prolonged trade war between two G7 nations sent traders scrambling. Investors interpreted Trump's rhetoric and retaliatory threats from Canada as signs that diplomacy was taking a backseat to political posturing. The shock was not limited to indexes. Individual sectors like steel, retail, and logistics saw their shares decline sharply, reflecting concerns over supply chain instability. President Trump escalated the situation by threatening to double the steel and aluminum tariffs to 50%. The market reaction was swift and severe. The Dow Jones Industrial Average plunged nearly 600 points before partially rebounding, still ending the day 478 points down. The S&P 500 slipped 0.7%, and the Nasdaq dropped 0.2%. Investors panicked. Analysts warned of ripple effects across multiple industries. Cars, electronics, appliances, and even groceries could face serious disruption as both countries braced for prolonged conflict. the auto sector grinds its gears. The automotive industry operates on razor-thin margins and just-in-time manufacturing practices, meaning even minor disruptions can cause major headaches. With Canada and the US being integral partners in auto parts supply chains, the ripple effect of tariffs is massive. From raw material extraction to final vehicle assembly, delays and increased costs threaten to upend production schedules. Auto workers fear layoffs as companies reassess their supply strategies. Nowhere was the economic squeeze more evident than in the automotive sector. Canadian aluminum is critical to the production of the Ford F-150, North America's top-selling pickup truck. The tariff shock is expected to increase the cost of each F-150 by at least $400. General Motors, Tesla, and Stellantis also face ballooning production costs. Canadian auto suppliers, many based in Ontario, are turning to Europe and Asia in search of stable trade partners. If this trend continues, US automakers may lose access to trusted supply chains that have fueled their competitiveness for decades. Industry insiders have warned that this growing instability could encourage manufacturers to shift operations outside of North America altogether. That would mean job losses in both countries and a serious blow to economic recovery efforts. Agriculture and energy in the crossfire. The agricultural and energy sectors represent both nations' deepest economic veins, and they're now under threat. Grain elevators, cattle ranchers, and dairy cooperatives in both countries are holding emergency meetings to brace for further losses. In the energy sector, Canada's role as a transit hub for American coal is being re-evaluated as a bargaining chip. But it's not without risk. Any misstep could prompt further US retaliation or damage long-standing energy partnerships. Agricultural trade, long a cornerstone of the Canada-US partnership, has entered dangerous territory. Canadian retaliatory tariffs have already cost US farmers billions. Soybean, corn, and dairy exports have plummeted. Simultaneously, Canadian farmers struggle to export beef and grain across the border due to retaliatory measures from Washington. Energy exports, particularly coal, are also at stake. The Port of Vancouver handles nearly 12 million metric tons of US coal annually, most of it bound for Asian markets. Without Canadian ports, US coal companies, especially in Montana and Wyoming, would face logistical nightmares. British Columbia Premier David Eby has proposed halting US thermal coal exports through provincial ports, citing environmental and strategic concerns. If enacted, the economic fallout for US coal producers could be devastating. Meanwhile, solar energy systems and green technologies, a growing sector in Canada, are also seeing rising costs due to US-sourced components being hit with counter-tariffs. A sovereignty flashpoint. Trump's remarks about annexing Canada struck a nerve deeper than trade. To many Canadians, the idea wasn't just offensive, it was symbolic of a larger pattern of disregard. Canadian leaders, regardless of party, united to denounce the suggestion, reaffirming national sovereignty. The comment also fueled broader debates around nationalism, autonomy, and the preservation of cultural identity. Citizens responded not just with anger, but with a renewed sense of unity. As tensions rose, President Trump made a shocking claim that Canada should become America's 51st state. The backlash was ferocious. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau responded bluntly, "There isn't a snowball's chance in hell that Canada will ever agree to that." Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre added, "Canada is a strong, independent nation." That will never change. A Change.org petition, led by Canadian comedian and veterinarian doctor Sarah Boston, calling for Trump to be banned from entering Canada, quickly garnered over 47,000 signatures. The petition cited Trump's felony conviction and his inflammatory rhetoric as reasons he should be denied entry. The petition stated, "We can't allow convicted felons from other countries across our border. We do not want Donald Trump to visit Canada under any circumstances. Provinces lead the charge. Canada's provinces didn't wait for Ottawa to act. Each region responded based on its unique vulnerabilities and industries. Quebec's liquor ban served as a symbolic consumer pushback. Nova Scotia's toll hikes added a layer of inconvenience for US visitors. Alberta's measured strategic shift reflected its status as a vital energy player. These moves, while diverse in approach, shared one message. Canadian regions were ready to defend their economic interests at all costs. Quebec banned US alcohol from provincial liquor stores. Nova Scotia doubled tolls on US vehicles. Alberta initiated a review of supply chains to reduce dependency on US imports. Yukon explored tolls on US drivers and paused American alcohol imports. Ontario took a measured approach. Premier Ford paused the electricity surcharge to open the door to negotiations, but warned it could return if talks broke down. Ontario's economy will not be taken for granted in unfair trade disputes, his office said. Premier Mark Carney, Canada's federal leader in waiting, has remained firm. Canada's sovereignty is not up for debate. Any trade agreement must be reciprocal and respectful. Consumer consequences. Consumers are often the silent casualties of trade wars. With tariffs driving up costs, prices at the checkout counter are rising fast. Retailers have begun adjusting inventory sourcing and, in many cases, cutting back on Canadian products. Meanwhile, Canadian families are rethinking their buying habits, turning to locally made goods or seeking non-US alternatives. The strain on supply chains is becoming visible on store shelves, particularly in electronics, clothing, and food packaging. The effects are now hitting home. Canadians are seeing rising prices on groceries, appliances, and everyday goods. US consumers are also feeling the pinch, especially in the Midwest, where trade with Canada underpins tens of thousands of jobs. The hockey industry is another unlikely casualty. Canadian-made sticks, pads, and gear are now subject to high tariffs. For American retailers, this means higher costs and supply chain disruptions. In a sport so central to North American identity, this development stings more than just financially. Electronics and household appliances are also affected. Laptops, blenders, and refrigerators are becoming more expensive for both importers and consumers, with companies passing costs down the line. Experts warn of a long-term impact. Beyond the immediate economic damage, experts are warning about lasting scars on diplomatic norms. Cross-border institutions that were once models of cooperation, such as the International Joint Commission and integrated border enforcement teams, are under pressure. Policy researchers argue that if the current hostility continues, institutional trust will erode, making future collaborations more difficult even after the dust settles. The long-term cost may not be visible yet, but its shadow looms. Economists have warned that prolonged tariff wars rarely yield long-term gains. Instead, they increase uncertainty, hurt small businesses, and strain political relationships that take decades to build. Trade policy experts point to the breakdown of international cooperation seen during COVID-19, a crisis where many countries, including Canada and the US, abandoned coordinated plans in favor of isolationist border closures. COVID taught governments that borders could be closed with strong public support, said researcher Laurie Troutman. That legacy is feeding today's nationalism. Edward Alden, co-author of When the World Closed Its Doors, notes that both progressive and conservative governments have used border restrictions for political gain. The temptation to rely on borders as solutions to complex problems, from migration to trade, is growing. What happens next? With diplomatic channels still active but tense, the outcome of this conflict could redefine trade norms in North America. If a resolution is reached, it may pave the way for stronger multilateral frameworks with clearer conflict resolution mechanisms. If it isn't, analysts warn of further regional destabilization and loss of global investor confidence. As voices from civil society, academia, business, and indigenous leadership grow louder, both governments will be forced to confront the reality that this is not just a political spat, it's a historic inflection point. Despite the economic damage, neither side has backed down. Negotiations are underway, but with deep divisions and nationalist fervor on both sides, progress is slow. Economists warn that prolonged tariffs could lead to a full-blown recession. Meanwhile, the mood in Canada is one of defiant resilience. National pride is soaring, and citizens are embracing local products and businesses like never before. Flags are flying, communities are uniting, and the message to Washington is unmistakable. Canada will not be bullied, with industries disrupted, markets shaken, and political rhetoric heating up. The Canada-U.S. trade war could shape the next decade of North American economics and diplomacy. Will the two countries find a path back to cooperation, or is this the dawn of a new economic Cold War? One thing is clear. This fight is about more than just trade. It's about sovereignty, identity, and the future of two nations whose histories have long been intertwined. As the world watches, the stakes couldn't be higher. Observers in the European Union and Asia are watching closely. Several trade analysts suggest that if the North American trade relationship continues to unravel, it could open new doors for Europe and Asia to deepen ties with Canada. Countries like Germany, Japan, and South Korea have already expressed interest in expanding trade partnerships with Ottawa, potentially reducing Canada's reliance on U.S. markets in the long term. Meanwhile, Indigenous communities across Canada have also weighed in, noting that many cross-border First Nations families have been uniquely impacted by the disruption. Leaders are calling for special exemptions and a diplomatic framework that protects Indigenous mobility and trade, regardless of future policies. "Our people have crossed this border for centuries," said one elder from British Columbia. "We should not be caught in the crossfire." Environmental groups have also entered the conversation, urging Canadian officials to use this moment as an opportunity to transition away from fossil fuel exports to the U.S. and focus on building a green economy. "This trade war may hurt now," one activist wrote, "but it could also be the catalyst for long-term sustainability and energy independence." Back in the U.S., a growing number of lawmakers are urging the Biden administration to intervene and steer the situation toward resolution. While Trump has remained defiant and combative, several senators and representatives are advocating for diplomacy, reminding their colleagues that Canada remains America's largest export market. "Alienating Canada is not a winning strategy," said one U.S. senator. "It weakens our economy and undermines decades of cooperation." What do you think? Should Canada keep pushing back, or is it time for a truce? Share your thoughts below, and stay tuned as this story continues to unfold. Thanks for watching. If you found this breakdown helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future updates on this escalating trade war.